Hey guys, I hope you're all doing very well. Welcome back to another video. And today I'm going to be talking about The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Now, I'm going to really be honest with you guys. When it comes to the Hunger Game franchises, I'm not the biggest fan. I thought the films were decent, but I wasn't really so connected with it. So, I haven't really recalled watching The Hunger Games for a very, very long time until this movie came out. But knowing this movie was a prequel to the first movie, I don't think it really mattered what the story was going to be for this one in any sort of correlation to the other film franchises. But I finished watching it, and if I had to describe my overall thoughts with this movie, I'm going to say it's pretty miserable. I really do think it's a pretty bad film. Um, there's lots of reasons I could really point at this film that I could really critique at. It's really hard to digest it, whether because I'm not so faithful to the movies as much as maybe other fans might be, but I have to say overall my experience watching this movie was pretty miserable. So let me just explain like really the faults with this film. I think one of the biggest faults with this movie, I have to really say, is the story and its runtime. I think the runtime just drags so much. It really just doesn't really build much moments, and I really think the story is very sloppily written. This movie itself was designed to be a three-parter, so there was a three part to this movie where you have, I'm not going to sort of describe it to spoil it, but it sections itself out to have very different sort of synopsis or sections to this film. And I think, to be honest with you, it would have been better off if they just somehow did it where they would do like another sequel or something like that. I think it would have made more sense to do that, to actually kind of, condense its narrative and its story for one section to another. Because the problem is with all this sort of narratives that they tried to build up with this film, the moments just never happened. So I'm kind of gonna build up the story in some way. So the main sort of aspect of this story is basically set during the first rebellion of the district, and it mostly involves around the Snow family. So basically, Carassa Snow was basically killed, and now all of a sudden, Cornelius Snow is now the next in line to, and now he's now the president of the capital of somehow. And basically, what happens now is that they run the 10th annual Hunger Games. He's now the mentor, and basically, he's a mentor for Lucy Gray, who is played by Rachel Zegler. And basically, Cornelius is basically trying to mentor her to try and win this 10th Hunger Games. It kind of sets that story for like the first and second part, but then the third part just, I think, was probably the biggest turn off for me. It just dragged and dragged and dragged, and it just, nothing built up any sort of momentum to the movie at all. And it made me question whether this was really anything narratively done to actually build up a story of any sort of way. It just sort of fell off, and it's crazy. So I'm gonna kind of build up some points. So the story, I think, has one flaw to me, and as well as its runtime. I also think it's not really got any action, to be honest with you, and it was really underwhelming. Even when it came to like the 10th Hunger Games scenes that they had, not really any moments. I gotta say that it didn't really, you didn't really feel like anything was unexpected in any way. It was just very lackluster, and I was pretty disappointed with a lot of the scenes in this movie. But yeah, there's a lot of flaws that this movie has. I think some of the things I could somewhat praise. I think the actors do actually try hard to actually do a good performance, but I think what they were left with the script and the writing, I just didn't think it helped at all. I mean, some of the lines in the dialogue were actually just kind of laughable. I was just sitting there out of pure boredom to actually see what was happening next, and somehow it would just been a vomit line from Cornelius, or even sometimes with Lucy Gray that was just sometimes laughable. And even that those two, chemistry between each other, it doesn't really have any sort of, scenes that somehow build up to the next parts of the film or the narrative in any way. It seems that they just build up dialogue, but really it doesn't build up any sort of relation to the story, which just felt flat massively. So there's a lot of real critiques that this film has, but I think really the performance that they really tried. I think visually the movie looks good. I don't think it feels overly CGI, which, to be honest with you, kind of felt a bit refreshing. And it didn't really play the typical jokey tropes that I've seen in a lot of modern Hollywood movies. So I could give some praise to that, but I think if the film overall just has a very clumsy narrative and its runtime borderlines itself where it lacks moments, I don't really think even those things would have really attributed to this movie being a real standout to me. But what I also find very baffling about this movie, it does also have a very talented set of actors. So like even people like Peter Dinklage and Viola Davis who are in this movie, I also felt their characters didn't really build up most of their motivations very well, and they didn't really. It seems that they kind of wasted their time a little bit with this film, because they didn't really play any real important role into this movie. So I feel there's a lot of questions even with a lot of the actors who were in this movie, what they could have really brought. I mean, they tried with their performances and everything, but they were just left with just really awful writing and just material to work with. And I also think for the storyline and the screen time that this movie had, it was just such a real trope to get through. I think really the biggest critique with this movie is the final act. The third part of this movie is just gonna really bore the hell out of you, and you really are just struggling to stay awake, really, just to follow anything that happens in this film. And these story changes just don't really need to happen. I think what would have been better is that they really should have actually made this like a part 1 to a part 2 potentially, or do a sequel. Because I think, to be honest with you, they really needed to find some sort of material that they could really work with to actually make sense of the story and how it could progress to the next one. I think doing this all at once was just a really hard experience to digest. So, yeah, lots of things wrong with this film. I think from its writing to its partially its acting, its action, its screen time, and its narrative, there's a lot of issues I have with this movie. But I think for a lot of people who are faithful to the Hunger Games movie and the franchise, I think there's a lot of things that you could really take from this movie that is good, and it does stick to the source material in a way. So I think for Hunger Games fans, they will like this movie, but I think for general film goers, it would probably be a sour experience. So overall, if I have to rate the Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, I'm going to be very harsh with this film, but I'm going to have to give it a 3 out of 10. I just didn't enjoy this movie. It was just really a hard experience to watch, and it really just turned off, my interest immediately with the amount of narrative changes, the story changes, a lot of pretty awful dialogue and writing in this movie. I just couldn't get into this movie, to be honest with you. But I can't really remember if this is really what the Hunger Games movies were originally. I didn't think it would have been this hard to watch, but this particular one was a hard watch to digest, really. It sounds like I'm repeating myself, and probably would sound like I'm kind of ranting with this movie, but I'm just don't really think there was anything I really got from this movie that was actually an interesting or any sort of moments to feel. Just everything just felt very flat to me. But yeah, that's my review for this movie. If you want to leave your thoughts on this movie, please comment, like, subscribe, dislike if you want to dislike. And yeah, that's about it. See you later.